daf to do. Ezra Hashem, today's daf is daf Yud Beis, Yud Beis, and we're going to start from Yud Aleph Amud Beis by the Mishnah. So we'll get the whole picture over here. The Mishnah begins, okay, Yud Aleph Amud Beis by the Mishnah. A person says, I want you to give this get to my wife, or this freedom document to my slave. Now, basically, the husband appointed the shliach to give it over to the wife, right? So it's not that the wife made the shliach, it's the husband's shliach. So let's say he gave it over to the shliach, this get for his wife, or the freedom document for his slave. Then he has second thoughts about it. If he wants to take it back, yachzor. You could take it back because the woman didn't get it, the slave didn't receive her get, so nothing happened. Divrei Rab Meir. Rab Meir says that's the chief opinion of Rab Meir. But Chachamim say, begitei noshim, you can take it back. In other words, by a get for a woman, the husband could take it back and call back the shliach. Avoloi b'shchrurei avodim. Not when it comes to freeing a slave. As soon as this shliach, even though the slave didn't make the shliach, it was the master, the owner made the shliach, but still, once it comes into the hand of the shliach, the owner cannot call it back. Why, says the Chacham so? One could act in the best interest of somebody, even if he's not present. And therefore, we can assume that the slave would want that this person be his like shliach, and therefore because it's advantageous for the slave to go free. So therefore, even though the slave didn't make him a shliach, he automatically becomes the shliach of the slave. And therefore, if the owner says, "Oh, I want you to take it back," you can't take it back. So therefore, the owner can't call it back. It's too late already. But to do something detriment for somebody, you have no right to do that unless he appointed you to do that. Now, why is it that getting divorced is a detriment and getting freed as a slave is advantageous? It's your best interest. Why? Because as a slave, you're not guaranteed, says the Mishnah, to get food. The owner does not have to feed you. If a person wants not to feed his slave, rashoi, he's permitted to do so. That's an amazing statement. A master can say to his slave, I'm not giving you food anymore. And we'll see then how is the slave going to eat. We'll see that in a minute. But he can do that. So really, the slave is not losing anything. In fact, it's more to his detriment to stay as a slave. Therefore, automatically, this person who received the freedom document becomes the shliach of the slave, and therefore, there's no backsies. The owner cannot regret it. That's permitted for a master to do that. But not to give food to your wife, nobody's allowed to do that, but the Ksuba says you have to give food to your wife. So by a shliach accepting a get on behalf of somebody, he's basically saying that the husband doesn't have to give her food anymore. So it's always to their detriment if you accept it on their behalf, the get. And therefore, unless the woman made this person a shliach to accept the get, the shliach does not become the messenger of the woman. And therefore, if the husband wants to retract his giving a get, he's permitted to do so. Amalahan, so Rab Meir said, but even for a slave, there is a detriment. A person could by making somebody free, there's a detriment happening because the slave had a right, as being a slave of a Kohen, let's suppose he was a slave of a Kohen, he had a right to go to people's granaries and say, I'm the slave of a Kohen, give me the truma. But now that he's getting a freedom document, he no longer will become the slave of the Kohen. So becoming freed as a slave in this case is a detriment to him. So how do you say that always, how could the Chachamim say that slavery, getting the freedom document, is a advantage for that person, for the slave? It's not always an advantage, says Rameir, because through that, he's not going to be able to get the truma anymore. And says, just like when a person divorces his wife, he doesn't get truma. So they said to him, it means because the reason why a slave has the benefit to take truma is it's not a right to take truma. We'll see what this means, but it's not a right of the slave. It's because you're the possessions of the Kohen. That's why you're eating truma, but it's not an inherent right in the slave. And therefore, in generally speaking terms, it's detrimental for the slave to remain a slave. It's always to his advantage to become free, because he's not guaranteed that the master is going to give him food. And therefore, that's what the Mishnah says. It's an advantage for him to go free. And therefore, once the shliach gets the get from the get freedom document from the master, even if he wasn't meant to be a shliach on behalf of the slave, automatically he becomes the shliach on behalf of the slave. And therefore, the master cannot take it back. Now, okay, hi, Lewis. We're just on Yud Aleph Amud Beis, and we're starting the Gemara. The Gemara is talking about a case like this, a story like this. The story is very simple. Reuven owes money. He borrowed money, and he owes to a Baal Chayv, right? Then let's say Reuven bought a brand new bike. So comes along Shimon and takes the bike and gives that Reuven bought and gives it to the creditor of Reuven, to the Baal Chayv of Reuven. Reuven, you're buying yourself a new bike. I'm grabbing that item that you bought and giving it to your Baal Chayv. So what's wrong with that, right? You're doing a benefit on behalf of the Baal Chayv. The problem is that sometimes this causes a detriment to somebody else. Well, how does it cause a detriment to somebody else? Because let's say Reuven owed Levi money. So if by Shimon grabbing the bike and giving it to the Baal Chayv, now Levi, who's also owed money by Reuven, has nowhere to collect the money from Reuven. So would that work? So the Gemara says like this: Yosef, Rav Huna, Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, Kamed Rav Yirmiyah. Rav Huna and Rav Yitzchak was sitting in front of this Rav Yirmiyah. The Yosef Rav Yirmiyah v'komenamne. And this happens that Rav Yirmiyah was taking a nap, basically, while his two students were in front of him. The Yosef Rav Huna v'kamar, Rav Huna said a comment. Shma minomid Rabbanim. We see from the Rabbanan's opinion is, we saw in our Mishnah, that once a shliach receives from a master the freedom document, the get shichrur from the master cannot retract it, because he now is doing something benefit on behalf of the slave, so there's no retraction. So therefore, we see from the Rabbanan, hatoifis lebal chayv. If no one asked this person, but let's say Shimon grabs the bicycle belonging to Reuven, and he gives it to the Baal Chayv. He gives it to the creditor of Reuven. Reuven borrowed money. So if he grabs it on his behalf, then the Baal Chayv, it's almost, even if he didn't give it over to the creditor, the fact that he grabbed it, it's almost now becomes the creditor's item, because somebody else, Shimon, did it on the Baal Chayv's behalf. He did something nice for him. Amalei Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef says, would you say that this holds true even in a situation which would cause a detriment to somebody else? Amalei, suppose, let's say, Reuven owed Levi money. So by this Shimon grabbing the bicycle on behalf of the Baal Chayv, he's causing a detriment to Levi, because now Levi has nowhere to collect from Reuven. Amalei, and it works. It works. It works. Ad hochi isprahu Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah woke up. Amalahu, he said, Dardiki, my children. That's what he called his students. Rav Huna, Rav Yitzchak, my children. Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, hatoifis lebal chayv. If someone grabs something on behalf of a creditor, but if it causes a detriment to somebody else, loy kana, then then that grabbing doesn't do anything. In fact, Reuven can grab it back because this person was not the shliach of the Baal Chayv, so he had no right to do it, and especially it's causing a detriment to another Baal Chayv. The entire Mishnah saying, but our Mishnah is similar to that it does work. In other words, our Mishnah really, a person is freeing a slave. Let's say the slave saved the owner's life, so basically the slave is owed his freedom, and so when the master writes the freedom document, if the shliach who is not and gives it over to a person who's not the shliach of the eved, the shliach who wants to accept the get shichra on behalf of the eved, even though he was not appointed by the eved, is true. He's doing something for the Baal Chayv, for the eved who's owed his freedom, but it's causing a detriment to the owner, because now the owner is losing a slave, and we see that it works. So we see hatoifis l'Baal Chayv b'mokum shechav la'acherim. If the guy is grabbing on behalf of a creditor, even though it causes a detriment to somebody else, it does work. And says the Gemara, our Mishnah is kol ha'oimet ka'oimet zchu dami. When the old master said, "Give this get shichra to my slave," it's almost as if he said, "It's yours. You should take it on his behalf, and you should take possession of this shichra on his behalf." So therefore, it's more stronger in that case. In our Mishnah, we would say yes, that person could take the shichra on behalf of the slave, but it doesn't work in all cases of a toifus l'Baal Chayv b'mokum shechav la'acherim. Let's see another scenario. Amar Rav Chizda said, a toifus l'Baal Chayv b'mokum shechav la'acherim bonu l'machloikis Rabbi Lezer v'Rabbanan. Whoever grabs on behalf of a Baal Chayv, but this causes a detriment to somebody else, is actually a machloikis Rabbi Lezer Rabbanan. The Tanam we learned in the Mishnah. We know that you're supposed to give payah on the corner of a field. So what happens? Mi shalikit as a payah. A strange guy sees, and he's a rich guy, but he doesn't need payah for himself. So he sees payah belonging to in a field, and he starts collecting the payah, not for himself, because he's wealthy and he's not permitted to take it on his behalf. Va'aman, he said, "Arezi l'pleini oni." This belongs to so and so the poor person. Rabbi Lezer Omer Zachalai. So then Rabbi Lezer says that's good. That ploini ani, that so and so the poor person can take that payah. The Chachamim, no, it doesn't work. Yitnanu la'onu anim tzarishin. You have to give it to the first poor person that you find, because we could see that Rabbi Lezer holds that a toifis, if you grab something, even if it causes a detriment to other aniyim, it works. That's why Rabbi Lezer says you give it to the ani that you collected it on his behalf. The Chachamim say it doesn't work, because by you collecting for this poor person, you're taking it away from other poor people. So therefore, Chachamim says it doesn't work, and you have to give it to the first poor person that you find. So that is the machlokes between Rabbi Lezer and Chachamim. So can hatoifis l'Baal Chayv b'mokum shechav la'acherim, would you be kaina? Amar Ameima v'teim Rav Papa. Ameima said, and some say Rav Papa said it. We go to your Beis Amar Aleph. Dimul loihi. Maybe it's not so. Atkam loikam Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer said over there it works, even though you're causing a detriment to other poor people. Hassam, because when this guy who really not supposed to get payah, collected it on behalf of somebody else. Elamigoi di iboya mafkeluhu nichsai v'have oni v'chazilei. He could have, made his own possessions hefka. He could turn himself into a poor person by, relinquishing ownership of all his possessions. So he's a poor person himself. So he can take it on his own behalf. So since he could get it on his own behalf, since he could take it on his own behalf, so therefore he can decide, I don't want to take it on my behalf. I'm going to give it to my friends. But over here, it's no. If Shimon grabs Reuven's bicycle to give to the Baal Chayv, it wouldn't work, because it's a detriment to Levi, another Baal Chayv of Reuven. Because this person that grabbed it, Shimon can grab it, he can't keep it. He has to give it to a creditor, and therefore And therefore, in that case, maybe Rabbi Lezer would agree that it would not work. And the other reverse works the other way. Rabbanan didn't say over there that it does not work, because when a person, there's a special gezeres hakosov that you're not allowed to select peya for a specific ani. Either you take it yourself or don't touch the peya. Eladikse, because the pasuk says loy salake laani, don't take it on behalf of another poor person. Loy talakit loy laani, you're not allowed to collect peya for somebody else. You can only take it for yourself. So therefore, there's a special gezeres hakosov, but it doesn't work. But a case with the bicycle, there's no gzeres hakosov. I can grab Shimon could grab the bicycle from Reuven on behalf of the Baal Chayv, even though it causes a detriment to Levi. So maybe they wouldn't hold that it's a problem. So the Gemara just asked the question. Rab Laza hi loisalakin my ovenly. Rab Laza said that one person could pick peya and give it to somebody else, but doesn't the pasuk say don't collect peya for another poor person? What does that mean? What do they use that pasuk? How does Rab Laza square off that pasuk? Answers the Gemara, that teaches you another din. He learns another halacha from that pasuk, that even if you're a poor person and you have this one tiny field, you have to give off peya. You have to give off peya for other aniyim, for other poor people. If you own the field and you have a little peya, you can't take the peya for yourself. You have to let it for somebody else. And the Chachamim probably know that concept from another pasuk. Okay, now we get to the main discussion of today's daf, which seems to imply from our Mishnah that an owner can tell his eved, I'm not paying you, I'm not giving you supper, breakfast, lunch, and you still have to work 8 hours a day. Now, that's what it seems from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says it's a benefit for a slave to go free because his meals are not guaranteed. Shamek mina. So from our Mishnah we can learn the halacha. Yochal arav loyme le'eved asayimi ve'ein izancha. Work for me, and I'm not giving you food. So that seems what it says. Now, how is the slave? You can ask me, how is the slave going to get food if he's not getting food from the owner, from the master? The answer is he'll go collecting at night. The owner has to give him, the master has to give him time to collect, but he doesn't have to supply food for him. And that's a very big thing, that a master could say to his slave, work for me, I'm not giving you food. Doesn't that our Mishnah mean to say that? Hence is the Gemara, our Mishnah is discussing the Amalei, where the master said, your earnings should spend your earnings to sustain yourself. That means that really, I'm not going to collect whatever you work. I'm not going to the salary that you get, you can keep for yourself and use it to buy your own food. So therefore, he's not getting food from the owner. So the Gemara wants to understand. So how are you going to explain the Mishnah? The Kavasa Gaba Isha, so the scenario that's discussed in the Mishnah about a woman, it must be talking about a woman, the Amalah, spend your earnings on your own food. That's what the woman is. So then, therefore, if that's the case, that the woman is not receiving any supper or lunch or food from her husband, Isha my loy, then why is it not considered a benefit for the woman to get a get? She's not getting anything from the husband. The husband's not giving her food. Answers the Gemara, because our Mishnah is talking about Isha b'delay safka. It's talking about a woman that although she's spending her own earnings on her own food, but it's still not enough. She still needs more money for food. So therefore, if she gets her husband's supposed to supply the difference. If she doesn't make ends meet, the husband is required because of the ksuba to pay for her and to make sure that she has enough. So the Gemara says, then why don't we say the same thing? Even name b'delay safek. That meant, why is the slave any different? If the slave is not making ends meet, then wouldn't we say that the master has to make up the difference? And therefore it's a detriment for the slave to go free. So why do we consider it to him advantageous for him to go free? Answers the Gemara, a slave that doesn't make ends meet when he's working for himself and cannot support himself, then the owner is not required to make up the difference because the owner doesn't need such a slave. So therefore, the owner does not have to make up the difference. So it's always to the benefit of the slave to go free and be a free person. Well, there's no point in being a slave because he's not getting any food from the slave. On the other hand, when it comes to a woman, by you accepting a get, it's a detriment for the woman. Why? Because until she gets the get, the husband is required to give her food. So that's how we explain our Mishnah. Tashma, come in here. Again, we're trying to say, is there a concept that a master could say to a slave, work for me and I'm not giving you food? Tashma, Eved Shegala La'ari Miklav, a slave that somehow killed somebody and went to the Ari Miklav. He's in this refuge city. Ein Rabbi Chayiv Lezoini. The master doesn't have to send food for him. Not only that, if he takes a job in that city, Shemas Yodav LaRabbi, that whatever he works belongs to the master. So we see that he doesn't have to send food, but if he makes a paycheck, a master gets to keep it. From here we see work for me, and I don't have to give you food. So the Gemara says, that Bryce is talking about the where the owner said, listen, you should spend your own earnings and pay your own food. So if that's the case, then what does the Mishnah say? That the earnings belong to the master. He has to spend it on his food. What does the Bryce mean with that? Why is the earnings belong to the master? He has to spend for food. And says the Gemara, lahadafa. If the surplus, let's say he makes above the food that he needs, that extra surplus of the check belongs to the master. So the Gemara says, hadafa pshita. Of course, a hadafa belongs to the master. If the Eved has enough food to eat, so any surplus should definitely belong to the master. And says the Gemara, Ma'u Desema, I would have thought it doesn't belong to the master. Even if there was no surplus, of course, the master wouldn't take. So if there is a surplus, maybe the master shouldn't take it. If the Eved is working and getting the paycheck by himself, I might think if there's any surplus in that paycheck of food that he's already covers his enough eating expenses, I might think that the owner should not accept, the master should not be able to take that. Tamash Malam, it comes to teach you that no, anything above what he eats, the slave has to send the extra money that he earned back to the master. What's the chiddush by an Ori Miklat? This could be anywhere. If the slave is spending his earnings on his own food, certainly that he has to send the extra to his master. What is the more novelty that he's in a refuge city? The Salkadaita Chamina, by a refuge city, the Torah says you should live there. That if someone's in a refuge city, make sure that they're living there. I would thought Avid Lecheyusa Tefei, that we should give him something extra while he's living there, because he's living all there by himself. So the slave should be able to keep. I might have thought the slave should be able to keep his surplus earnings. Hamash Malan teaches you that he doesn't keep his surplus earnings. So the Gemara asks, so you're telling me that the beginning of the Mishnah of this Brisa with the slave in the Ari Miklat is where the slave was told, spend your earnings on your food. Wait a second. The second part of the Brisa says, if a woman ends up in this refuge city, that the husband is required to pay her foods. That it's talking about a husband that didn't tell her to spend her own earnings on food. The amala, because if he told her to spend her own earnings on food, then why does it say bala chayv b'mnusayis? Bala my chayv. Why is the husband required to give her food? Right? If she's earning and has enough for food, why does the Brisa say that the husband has to give her food? Since the second part of the Brisa is talking about where he didn't tell her spend your earnings on your food, so therefore when it talks about a slave, it's also talking about a case where he did not say spend your earnings on your food. And says the Gemara, La'ilam da Amalek. It's really that he did say that, and it's talking about by the woman. He also told her spend your earnings on your food. So then why is he required? Visha b'delay safka. It's talking about a woman that doesn't make enough to sustain herself. Therefore, when it says bala chai ben zenesel, he has to make up the difference if she's not earning enough. But then there's a second part, a 2b of that brayta that says vim amalat si masidayach b'mizanasayach. If he told his wife, spend your earnings on your food, rashai, then he's permitted to do so. Michlal must be the ratio, the second part, which talks about the first case, that husband and wife situation, is the loy amala. He didn't tell her that spend your earnings, si masidayach b'mizanasayach. And says Gemara, no, it's one big case. Hachikama. This is what the Bryce says. Normally, if she doesn't make enough, she's earning something, but she doesn't make enough, then the husband has to make up the difference. The im is sapekes, but if she does make enough, the amalan, he told it, spend your earnings on your food, rashoy, then he's permitted to do that, and then he's not required to give her food. So the Gemara says, Masapeka Smaila Memer, if she's making enough for her food, of course he doesn't have to give her food. She has food. She's earning, and she's spending her own money on her food. So the Gemara says, Mao the same, I would have thought, Kol Kuda Basmela Penima, Kamashmalan. I would have thought that no, we have to stop a man from saying, especially in a foreign place, to allow his wife to go around and take a job. The best thing is she should be quarantined in home because that's more tzniistic. Kamashmalan, that even though she's in the Ari Miklet, the husband has a right to say, go take a job, I'm not giving you food, and whatever you earn, you can spend and eat and keep that. So the Gemara says, let us say that it's a machloikas tanoim, whether a person could say to his slave, I am not giving you food. Rab Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rab Shimon says, Yochel ha'eved loymel l'rabbi b'shnei b'tzoros. A slave could say to his master during the hunger years, Oy panaseni, either you're going to give me food, or let me go free. So really, from Rab Shimon Gamliel's words, if a slave could demand that from his master, it must be that the master has to give food for the slave. And if he doesn't, the slave could demand freedom. But Chachamim says that the owner doesn't have to do that. If he doesn't want to free him, he can do it. He doesn't have to free him. My lab all can be paga. That's exactly the argument. The Marasova, the Chachamim hold yochel, that a person could say to his slave, I'm not giving you food. Rab Sova, but Rab Shimon holds, any yochel, he's not allowed to say that to his slave. And therefore, if he's not giving food for his slave, then the slave could demand freedom. So it's a machlekes tanoim. So the Gemara says, V'tizbra, is that makes sense? Your interpretation of this brisa, that is the machlekes tanoim? If the slave is not getting food, then what should he say? Is he demanding, give me food or let me go free? He should demand, either feed me or let me work and let me keep my own wages. That's what it should say in the brisa. Why does Rav Shimon Gamliel say in a hunger year? If it's just a matter of a discussion between a slave and his master, whether the master is required to feed him, it does not matter if it's a hunger year or a regular year. It's a special unique case of this brisa. He did say that the slave he told the slave, spend your earnings on your own food. But during hunger years, the slave can't make enough to eat. So therefore, the slave is demanding freedom. Now, why is the slave demanding freedom? Rab Shimon Gamliel Sova, he's saying, either let me go free, either feed me, because I'm not making ends meet, or let me go free because the people who will see me as a free Jew, they're going to give me support. They'll give me tzedakah. And as a slave, they're not going to give me tzedakah. So that's why he could demand his freedom. Rabbanan say, he doesn't have to let him go free. If he's collecting tzedakah, if whoever is going to have give money in tzedakah to a free man will give money to a Jewish slave. So therefore, the Rabbanan said that the Eved has no right to demand to go free. Tashma, come in here. The Amar Rav said, and what the Gemara is now going to prove, that it's a master has no right to say to his slave, work for me and I'm not giving you food. That is an impossibility. And the Gemara is going to prove it from Rav's statement. The Rav said, Hamak Avli. Someone said, whatever my slave earns, not the slave himself, but whatever my slave earns, I'm giving to Hegdish. So now, how is the Eved going to eat? So the Oiseh Eved, so because whatever the Eved is going to earn belongs to Hegdish. So who's supposed to feed him? Oiseh Eved Loiva, that slave should borrow money, and then go buy food, and then work a little extra parade, and he pays it back. We're going to discuss how that works. Now, but listen, who put him in a situation that now the Eved has no food? Shmamina. From Rav's statement that you could put a slave in a situation where he'll have no food, we see that the master has a right to say to a slave, work for me, and I'm not going to give you to eat. So the Gemara says, here we're talking about really that once the Eved was made to all his wages belong to Hegdish, is that the master is the one that's taka giving him food. So then if that's the case, if that's what Rav is talking about, then why did Rav say that the slave, we go to Amid Beis, loiva v'oichel? Why does he have to borrow to take food? What's he needing food for if the master is still supplying the food? And says the Gemara lahav dafa, because for the extra food, then he can borrow and eat. So the Gemara says, "V'lei melei Hegdish." So Hegdish should tell him, "Ad hashtu sagi loch b'loy hadafa, v'hashtu nama tiske loch b'loy hadafa." Hegdish should say to this person, listen, till now you lasted without surplus. Let's say you wanted a surplus food. Now, so why do we allow you now to take time off your work to borrow and work extra to supply? You need extra surplus when you were just owned by your original owner. You didn't need a surplus. So why are you doing it now? So the Gemara says, Hegdish Hegdish doesn't mind if he works extra for his surplus, because the Eved becomes more robust and more full and more happier and more healthier. So the Hegdish doesn't mind that he works extra. So just a little bit more. So we say, again, we're explaining Rav. And Rav said that if a person made Hegdish the earnings of his slave, so the earnings of the slave taka belong to Hegdish, but the master still has to supply food. But if he wants anything extra, the slave has to oisa, he should borrow money, oisa and work, upereya kama and pay it back. Wait a second. If he's going to work to pay it back, kama kodesh lei, every dime that he's going to work, every dollar that he's going to get, any paycheck that he's going to get automatically belongs to Hegdish. So how is he ever going to pay back what he borrowed? Answers the Gemara, but pachos mishava pruta. He should make up with the guy that he's going to work for, that he should pay him less than a shava pruta. So every paycheck should be less than a shava pruta, and therefore that way that paycheck which is less than a shava pruta, less than a penny's worth, does not belong to Hegdish. He gets to keep it, and then once the Eved has it, he can combine it and pay back where he borrowed. And then Gemara says hachinami mistaber. The Gemara concludes, and this is where we'll end. This makes sense that it's talking about a scenario where the master himself is giving food. The Amar Rav, because Rav said it's a different scenario. Amagdashli de avde, someone who made Hegdish the wages of his slave. Oisei Eved oisei ba'oichel. The Eved doesn't have to give his wages to Hegdish. He could work and feed himself. The Eloi Avda man palakle. If he's not going to work for himself, well, how is he going to eat? So how do you square off the two steers and Rav? One place says Rav says whatever paycheck the Eved gets, he gives it to Hegdish, and here the Rav says that whatever paycheck the Eved gets, he gets to keep to pay for his food. It must be that the first case was the first case was that he's the owner is still feeding him, and therefore the Eina Yachal means he can't keep it himself. Therefore, anything that he earns, he has to give to Hegdish. But the second case of Rav, this number 2 of Rav, is b'she'enim ala, is when this owner is not giving him food. Shopper, then everything makes sense. If this second case is talking about, if the first case was also talking about where the owner does not have to give, the master is not giving him food, then how is this slave gonna ever have food? Who's gonna serve for him? Man the boy niflech. It's the one that's supposed to give him food, which is the owner. This is what you should walk away today. That from here we prove a concept that a master is not allowed to say to his slave, work for me, let me keep your paycheck, and I'm not giving you to eat. If you want to eat, go collect from tzedakah. He's not allowed to do that. Our Mishnah seems to say that your Mishnah seems that to say that you could do that. Our Mishnah is talking about where he told the slave, keep your earnings, keep your paycheck, and pay for the food yourself. And our Mishnah is talking about a certain case where the slave doesn't make enough money to pay for himself. He's not making enough money to ends meet. So then, since the owner is not required to make up the difference, it's advantageous for the slave to go free. But really, shmami na eini yochel shmami na. From here we see that a master cannot tell his slave, work for me and I'm not giving you to eat. We're going to learn tomorrow that there's another opinion that holds a slave could do that. We'll see that tomorrow, Bez Hashem. Okay, we'll stop here.